Welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're so excited that you're here to see our Marnie Weber Artist Lecture. And afterwards, we'll also have a reception in the Boone Gallery. So definitely come and we'll get to enjoy the artwork as well. We'll have some cookies over there. And if you want to catch our other show, we do have the Allison Reggett and Kyla Hansen show in Gallery V, and we'll have the little brown paper lanterns that go from the Boone to that gallery. So if you want to catch that show too, it's sculptural works that complement and are inspired by Marnie's incredible work. So one thing, I say huge thanks to the Pasadena Art Alliance. Without them, we could not do our great programming, and so we are deeply grateful to the Pasadena Art Alliance. Also, we wanted to thank the Student Services Fund and the Office of the President and the PCC Foundation and Visual Arts and Media Studies Division and our Dean Joe Footner. And we wanted to thank too Eladio Fernandez in Office Services for all the great in-house printing job on our brochures and posters. We have a wonderful essay by Andrew Berardini in the brochure for the Marnie show, so please do pick up one of those in the gallery after the lecture. And also I want to thank Charles Jones, our wonderful gallery manager. He did all the graphic designs on all our programs, so thank you to Charles. It's just been so great to work with Marnie. I mean, really big thanks to Marnie and her assistant, Daniel Hawkins. They've been incredible to work with. Marnie's career has been an international art career from the very start. She started in band and did her Spirit Girls, was her very own band. And then that performance background she's brought into her art career, where she includes in her films and videos, installations, painting, sculpture, drawing, collage. She brings it all together and creates these immersive experiences for her audience that really taps into our subconscious collective, this sort of almost primordial psychology that we all kind of have in our being. So her work is so unique and so uniquely Marnie. I mean, her work is unmistakable and it's uniquely, profoundly affecting for all of us. So it's with great pleasure and honor that I introduce Marnie Weber.
I'm so happy you could come tonight. I wanted to thank Mahara Sinclair, who's the gallery director, and Charles Jones, who've helped me put on the show in the gallery, and we're all going to get a chance to go see it after this. It was really a fun experience working with them, and Joe, Mahara thanked also, been nice to get to know Joe, the dean, Joe Footner. And working with some of the students so far and meeting them, it's been a real pleasure. It's a great school, and I'm really happy to be here at PCC. So the course of events tonight, I'll talk for about 35 minutes about my work and show some images, and then I'm going to show about 17 minutes of films, starting from the very first film I've shot to the last film, just excerpts. And then we'll have a short Q&A and then go to the gallery. If there's further questions, I'll meet you in the gallery, and you can feel free to ask me. I'm quite approachable. So let's see. I'd like to start my talk on my artwork with the music. But a little personal background. I was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I grew up in a small town called Easton, back in the day where you could leave your kid out in the woods and not worry about them not coming back or even getting Lyme disease. So it was a different era. And so I think it informs my work. You'll see I use a lot of natural elements, but the natural elements are actually fake natural elements, so I'll get more into that as I go further in. And I went my father was an art historian who specialized in Chinese bronzes. We traveled through Asia for a year, ended up in Manhattan Beach, California, where I spent my teenage years. I went to USC for 2 years, and then UCLA for 2 years, and then I graduated. And during the time I was in college, I was also in a band. I was in a band called Party Boys. And that was really the birth of me as an artist. And it formed what I am still doing today. Okay, here's the band Party Boys. What I learned from the band Party Boys. We had a very do-it-yourself approach. If someone didn't want us to play, we would offer to build a stage, or we would offer to play for free, and usually talk the people into it. We played bars downtown, we played in New York during the early 80s, Danceteria, Pyramid, a lot of the bigger clubs. We played in London, and the other thing that I learned from the band was that if you don't wait for somebody to discover you, because apparently they never will. So we eventually broke up after 7 years and had a lot of different shows. It was somewhat there was some theatrical stuff, some props, but not the extent that I really wanted to go. And so after the band broke up, I became a solo performance artist. This was Los Angeles in the early 80s, and this was at the height of performance art in Los Angeles. This is me as Coquette Circus Girl. I'm impaled through a stuffed pony. I started to take on different guises because one day when I was in the band, it occurred to me that most songs are written in character. When you're an artist writing music, you sort of imagine yourself to be someone else, and you write lyrics that are more dramatic or passionate than perhaps your everyday life is. And so I thought to myself, well, how interesting would it be to become the characters that I was singing about? So these were musical, theatrical, rock performances. And I would play to backing tapes, and I would write the music, and I would do the sets and the props and the costumes, and I would get other musicians to play with me. Here's an early performance at Lace. The clown is wearing a wading pool. And so this was a kind of an important piece to me in that when I made 3 trips in a truck downtown hauling props, sets, equipment, I thought, well, I've got to think of a better way of doing this. And so I started to make Super 8 films. We're going to see a couple of the very early Super 8 films, and the Super 8 films would serve as backing projections. Here's a few of the other different characters I performed as. I performed as an old woman many times. You will see this actual mask in the gallery as a farm maiden on the milk jug. I like to reutilize a lot of my masks in my sculptural work. This is Happy, Cry for Happy. I make loose poetic narratives for each character. And Happy's journey was that she goes into the forest and is a bunny. And the other forest creatures say to her, you better not be a bunny because bunnies are victims. And so she transmorphs into a few other characters, a deer, which was not the best choice either. And then eventually she becomes a flower. And here she is singing to her little frog friend. This was I was given a gallery space for the first time, and so I wanted to do something very sculptural, and I had the singers and dancers and a guitar player mounted up in the corners as the 4 caryatids from the Greek porch. And I then was the singer. I'm not wearing a mask here. I felt I was in character at the time. It didn't quite work for me, so from that point on I was in character. Here's a couple of the other musicians, singers. A few other guises. We'll just flip through these. Here I am as a bunny much later on. This is I wanted to do a rock opera that was set in the 70s, but my first impetus for the Spirit Girls that Mahara mentioned was I was driving one day and I thought to myself, I grew up in the 70s going to all these concerts, Genesis, Bowie, Ozzy, and it was just a bunch of guys doing theatrical rock, and I thought that really was such a sad thing that it was not a niche that was covered by a woman. And then I thought, well, I'm just going to create a band that was a 70s theatrical rock band that was all women, but they died tragically and they were never allowed to perform beyond a few shows. And so I brought back this band called the Spirit Girls. And we did a lot of different shows. We did we put out a CD. I did personally, not as a collaboration, 4 Spirit Girls movies, one of which you'll see excerpts of tonight. And so this is the rock opera called Songs That Never Die. Here's the Spirit Girls playing. It turned out I couldn't, I ended up getting a male guitar player. You can see him. But he didn't mind dressing like a woman. Danny Tull. He just had that prog rock sound. And it would move from songs to more theatrical moments. Here are the girls with their umbrellas. And they go off to sea at the end. This is my pile of stuff, records and things that I've worked on over the years. I also have a love of limited edition and special edition records, art records. And the first Party Boy record was an edition of 2000, which each cover was unique on letterpress. Run through different plates. And so I got inspired to make small run edition records of my own music. The first one was called Songs Hurt Me, and I did 100 covers, each one with a different collage on the back. This is the photograph for the non-limited release, Me Shot Downtown. There's that deer that I mentioned, the one that had some bad luck. Here's Songs Hurt Me. Each cover was spray painted and letterpress. I'll just show you a few of the back covers. It was a very labor-intensive project, and I ended up doing it 3 more times for each record, and now I'm actually doing it for a soundtrack record again. This was the official release for Woman with Bass. This was the letterpress and spray paint backside. This was now the CD era, 1991. Here's a few of the collages for the reverse. I had been working with naked women quite a bit, from finding old men's magazines thrown away downtown. I thought that it made an interesting figurative approach to the collage making. This was a collage that ended up as the Sonic Youth cover, and this was for the 3rd limited edition release. A friend of mine said, I'd like to have a collage with you on it. So I just made him this as part of that package, and then the people from Sonic Youth wanted me to do their cover, so I sent a bunch of slides, and they chose this one, which was kind of funny because that's actually me. And I'm in a bed in Japan, and I was they wanted a model for blankets, and I found the pictures, and every single picture I have the exact same look, and I look petrified. So I don't really know what happened to their ad campaign. made for a good cover. Here's a few of the posters I did for them. Maybe some of you young folk aren't familiar with Sonic Youth, but they're worth checking out. Now here we're going to start into the early films. They were shot on Super 8 with a crew of one, my husband Jim Shaw, and myself, and we went to different locations and I would be different characters. This is Destiny and Blow Up Friends. You'll be getting to see her short film. I do the soundtracks myself, so that's something to note when you're watching. And she's sort of a lot of my characters are hapless, lost, and on journeys where they do eventually find enlightenment. It's rather a theme quite often in my work. Here's the Red Nurse and the Snowman, a conglomeration of fairy tales. People say that my work reminds them very much of fairy tales, and I do have a lot of fairy tale inspirations, but I don't directly reference them, or if I do, like with this Red Nurse, it's a hybrid. She goes out into the woods to save people or animals that are injured, and then she begins to realize that they're just pretending to be injured. You'll see a short excerpt of that film too. And here's the Spirit Girls together for their first photo shoot. I used these plastic-looking masks because I wanted them to be sort of anonymous, like spirits. And I'm always the one in the red wig. Here's the our record album cover. It's a full-length CD available on my website if anyone's interested. This is the Spirit Girls Western Song movie, which you'll be seeing tonight, excerpts of. It's in reality, it's a 25-minute movie, and it's shot on 16 millimeter. And I guess what I can say about this movie in terms of narrative is that the lead spirit girl, that's me in the red hair again, she gets a little bit tired of all the responsibility of being the leader of a group, and so she leaves them behind to journey on her own. She ends up meeting a group of clowns, and they talk her into doing a sideshow act as a spirit channeler. And this was actually based in history of America, 1890, the spiritualist movement, where women, for the first time, got their voice on stage in a sort of ironic twist. You could, in the late 1890s, early 1900s, you could see women on stage in burlesque acts, circuses, and spirit channelers. And so I thought that was an interesting way for the spirit girl to get her voice, was through actually channeling other people's spirits. Now, when I do an overarching theme or narrative, which can run 5 years, which the Spirit Girls did, I make the collages and the sculptures in keeping and in character, as if the Spirit Girls were actually making the work, and I try to get in the mindset of it. But they also do show quite often their cohorts and the animals and creatures that they hang out with. You'll see some of the pull toys back in the background, and that comes from the idea of when you're a child and you think your toys are really big and awesome, and then when you get to be older, it turns out they're really small. So I would like to play with size here, and so you'll see some of these pull toys. There's one of the Spirit Girls made into the saddle. The other thing to note about my sculptures, all of my sculptures, except 2 of them, they're always made from found objects, things that I find and then re-kludge together. The horse is actually a taxidermy foam form. Not that people stuff their horses very often, but it was mostly for a zebra because that seems to be a popular thing to stuff. And so you can buy these online from a taxidermy company. And the ghost clown is simply a clown that has died and become a ghost. characters, friends. This is the lead spirit girl running away, and the way I make my work in those days, it was a photographic background of a diorama. You could see the little green grass from the whistle stop, the train store, and the actual chicken rooster is about this big. And so then I would photograph myself in position and actually hand glue it down and stick it down. This was before Photoshop, and so it was never any much of a question. Each piece is always unique. I don't do prints, and I think the reason part of that was from my love of these special edition records where people would get an LP and know they actually are the only person who has that exact cover. So I never wanted to do prints. Here's the spirit girls, the stallion. I try to set up a little situation as if it's a small part of you walk into a dramatic play and the characters are doing something you're not quite sure, but you get a little uncanny feeling as if something's about to happen. Now the spirit girls in general were rather repressed, and they wore white gloves, and they were a little bit afraid of everything except the lead singer who went off on her own. She's not here. And so you can see, and the stallion represents their unbridled passion running through the scene. Then when I do a film, I like to create an environment where people can sit and watch and feel as if they become part of it. And in this case, I used hay bales that had they have a strong odor. And in this case, they had chiggers for the first 2 days, which died off, which was an unexpected thing. But luckily, they died off in time. And so this is how you would see video projected. Here's some of the spirit girls transcending up and back to where they came from. These are the backdrop paintings, and then again me posing in position. This actually was a small little circus tent that I lit on fire on a barbecue and photographed it, and then put the little figures in front. Again, this is like a moment of her passion exploding as she wants to break free from the circus. Now, the spirit girls have not been able to have their voice except when they were the lead spirit girls channeling spirits. And so I thought it would be interesting if when they finally got their voice, they were to speak through ventriloquist dummies. And so when they do get their chance, I made a film where they speak, but then they get kind of disconnected and they tell barroom jokes. So they finally get their voice, but it's not what we expected. Each girl is represented by a different doll. And then here's a cohort on a you can see the tree has a woman's face on it, and that's a Dirty Bunny costume. I like, I like to find things also at the costume store that was just a bunny costume that I made dirty. And then the dolls were photographed, and they were real working ventriloquist dolls. The actual bodies were found online. They're ventriculated mannequins, and then the heads were what were manufactured. Here they go off in a boat, as in they did in their rock opera. Now, people ask me a lot about why I'm so interested in clowns. I think it has something to do with family lore. My father said that during the Depression era, I'm a child of parents from the Depression era, the hobos would come around and his mother would give them food. And so there was the first hobo clown was Emmett Kelly, and he tried to make light of a very tragic and sad situation that was coming all over America at the time. by being a hobo clown. And so I kind of became obsessed with hobo clowns, and there was also Red Skelton, the next famous hobo clown. And then we had another hobo clown here. What was her name?
Hobo Kelly.
Hobo Kelly, thank you. We had Hobo Kelly here in Los Angeles, and so I like to keep up the tradition. So it occurred to me I wanted to kill off the lead spirit girl because I was tired of being her and doing it. And so I thought, well, what better to have a group of clowns surround her at her own funeral, because when a clown dies, the clowns are out of honor. They come to the funeral in their clown costumes. So in this installation, this was at Mocha downtown, you would have soft funereal music playing and clowns laughing and crying. I like it when you can't tell if someone's laughing or crying, so that's the feeling. Here they are. They're again mannequins. I get all the costumes kludged together. The clown costume, one of them came from a Christian clown store online. The heads aren't clown masks. What they are male and female old people masks. And so I like to paint them to look like clowns. They're more realistic than any kind of clown mask you can buy today. And the heads are made archival by filling with expanding foam stuck on the mannequin and then coated in lots of coats of resin and then painted to look like clowns. And then the lead spirit girl deathbed here is again a mannequin and then a lot of silk flowers dipped in powder pall. Here, so you can see that, and then they're made hard and then repainted again. And you get the glass eyes from the taxidermy company. They also sell human glass eyes, just in case. There's a couple more clowns. Oops, that was the artist clown, because that's what artists look like. And then Birdo, the classic hobo clown. I've got a couple clowns over there too in the gallery. Mom clown. Day drinking mom clown. Okay, these are the two sculptures that I actually were commissioned, and they weren't made from found objects. This is like a 10-foot tall bear made of camphor wood. I designed it, and it was carved in China, and the skirt and hat were made at the studio. And this is a marble ghost clown that was again carved over there. And it's nice to see your work made by somebody else, but I don't partake in that practice anymore. A grief pig. Here's the actual same pig. You can get these pigs to stand outside of butcher shops if you can talk them into it. But they're really to advertise the meat. And so here, this one's going into battle to perhaps fight off the butcher. Spirit girl goat. And the first of my many, many, many scarecrows. I've probably done a couple dozen scarecrows. For every scarecrow here tonight, there's probably 2 dozen. I like anything that is a effigy of human beings, and I really call my scarecrows spirit vessels, because in the ancient tradition of art history, my father being a Chinese bronze specialist in spirit vessels, the idea was that a spirit that's floating around needs somewhere to reside if they need to come back to Earth and spend some time. And so I try to think of these as spirit vessels, just in the happy event that there's a spirit wandering around and needs somewhere to hang out for a while. And I think sometimes when I go into my studio, I feel like there could be somebody in the clowns, but it remains to be seen. Corn God. Another panther. Okay, now we're moving into the monster territory. I was thinking to myself, I would really like to work with monsters. Quite often, the male artists in contemporary art work with monsters, and I thought, who but better to represent monsters than a woman? And so I started to think of the different cohorts monsters that one might find under their bed, and by befriending them, it is a way of healing in a psychoanalytical sense, but also transformation, which is a big theme of mine. So here's Happy Go Lucky. It's a large-scale installation, backdrop painting again, a life-size boat. The different monsters are on mannequins. This was at Grenoble. I had a retrospective in France. This was the centerpiece. Excuse me. There would be a soundtrack of waves crashing, a woman moaning, and I think little monster noises. There's a little bit of a close-up. It kind of resembles a band, doesn't it? Here's some headdresses that the Spirit Girls wore in one of their movies. Again, I try to blur all the lines about art. You know, costuming becomes sculpture, music becomes soundscapes. You will see in the window, the front window of the gallery, I did an installation which is also, in my mind, a window display. Here's some of the other costumes, and again, more of the animals. The Spirit Girl has also been rescued by the donkey and her little friends. Here's a group of monsters that was from my first site-specific performative installation, musical film screening. And so I include this one. These are monsters that I created and also had help from with some CalArt students in making of a Super 8 film that was at Mountain View Cemetery here in Altadena. Beautiful mausoleum and cemetery. If you ever get a chance, it's open every day from 9 to 4. And so these are the creatures, and this is the lead character. She lives with her father, who will only eat sweet potatoes, and she tries to talk him into eating something else. Peaches are a fine alternative, and they're sweet, but he only wants the sweet potatoes. He drives her mad eventually. She has a breakdown, and she's saved by the monsters. Here, the film was shown in the mausoleums. It was screened, and the Spirit Girls played in front of it as this live score, and people were allowed to come in to the mausoleum, walk anywhere they wanted, as well as go. Oh, here we are, the Spirit Girls on stage. There's you can see behind the person with the accordion; those are actually crypts. Here's the graveyard. I had characters throughout the graveyard, and I had tour guides. I had written a script for the tour guides regarding many of the people that had died and were buried there. So it was sort of a historical tour through the graveyard, but the grave diggers were kind of deranged, so it was not entirely accurate. And then in the gallery, because mausoleums have galleries, which is a nice surprise, I showed my collages of graveyards, which I had shot photographs and then collaged on top of the graveyard photographs. It's one of my hobbies. When I go to a town I haven't been to, I like to photograph the graveyards. Some of the characters came in and they gave me the flowers from some of the funerals. Here's a collage. This actual graveyard was shot in London. And So the spirit girls are peeking up from the graves. Some of the other monsters. Now this is my next site-specific installation. This was in Lille, France. I had pretty much just, well, as you saw, put the lead spirit girl to rest and didn't want to deal with her anymore. And so they said, oh, we really want to have a spirit girls installation. And so I said, well, okay, I could resuscitate her one more time. And so I got a resuscitation doll, and here she is. Her friends came along to say goodbye to her, and she's lying there in bed. And the whole room was designed over here, and then the costumes were shipped there. I like to tell younger artists that much of being an artist and being in the art world has to do with shipping budgets. And if you would like to become an international artist, it's best to make videos because they're easy to send, and then eventually people will want to pack up your work, pay for it, pay for taxes, pay for shipping, and then send it back and forth. So that's a little tip. I didn't realize that going into it. So here's some more. There's some collages on the walls and a lot of this stuff. We created this whole installation in 3 days. It was, I had help. Then this was an installation I did as another site-specific in Pittsburgh. I sent the heads along and I said, I want to collect everything from thrift stores and create scarecrows, and you guys make the ghost train. So it is much like the ancestors hopping on the train from another time. And then the soundtrack was noise, free jazz, drumming mixed with the train sounds to create a real rhythm, and with highs and lows. Here's the ghost train. It's like a stage flat. I'm beginning to make work that are like stage flats, so they're easy to build abroad or not in Los Angeles. Here's the collection. This was really a fun project. I got to go to all the thrift stores in Pittsburgh, had a budget, bought whatever I felt like buying, and then the next week I put it all together. This was at Mattress Factory. It's interesting when you go into thrift stores of different towns. All of what you find is so different. There's a lot of handmade things in Pittsburgh. Not as much plastic as we have out here. Some real beautiful antique type things too. Okay, now the Spirit Girls were asked to play Festival Supreme, and I, again, had retired them, and I thought, well, okay, maybe we can come back for one last hurrah. So here we are at Festival Supreme. Jack Black, the comedian, wanted 21 monsters to wander throughout the festival, and so I created the 21 monsters. And then here he is with the monsters. Now these monsters are canvas, hand-painted, little capelets. The heads are mounted to bicycle helmets. They are masks filled with expanding foam coated in resin, mounted on helmets, and then the capelets come down. There's a couple balls mounted on each side of the helmet. So the human's head, the real human's head, is at the ascot level. So they're quite tall. I was happy with the design. And here they are running through the festival. Here they are on the little train. This is an artist, Stephen Hull. Some of the train and the carousel are his. Here they are on the merry-go-round. And here they are outside greeting people. Well, since I had these 21 monster costumes, I thought they're just screaming to be in a ritual scene. And so it gave me the idea for my next movie. And I had always wanted to play a witch, not just be one in real life. And so I thought of a story where I play the old witch, and my daughter plays the young witch, and that's going to be a bit further down the line. So just keep these monsters in mind. Here they got to go to Geneva. I had a survey show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Geneva, and this is a project I did, a collage a day for 366 days, because it turned out it was a leap year. And each one I allowed myself about 15 to 20 minutes on it, and here's the whole row of them. Here's a few of the individual ones. I've found Arizona Highways. They're another magazine called Ideals, stuff that I rip out from magazines, mannequin girl heads, doll bodies. I like the, moth as a metaphor, skunk girl, upside down scarecrow, dead bluebird of happiness. Some of them were more painterly, even more painterly. This is Halloween. When it was a holiday, I would do whatever holiday it was. Cloud Girl, Christmas Day. Now, this is also part of that show at the museum in Geneva. Again, back to the shipping bugaboo. I wanted to do a large-scale project and didn't without shipping everything. So I made these stage flats of a small western town. Through there you see the Spirit Girls of Western Town film being played. Sent some of my clown costumes over there, and each room was a different installation. Here's the tavern, and the sounds of people laughing, crying, and getting drunk, and music coming from the tavern. And then also theatrical lighting is really hugely important. When I was there, they said they had never done a theatrical lighting. They had only done fluorescent lights, and so it proved to be quite the challenge to bring in a lot of theatrical lighting and to set everything up, but it really evokes a mood. Here's the ventriloquist dolls in their actual natural habitat in a bar, sitting around. It's nice because people can sit and watch the film and have a drink. Here's some of the circus collages. Some of the farmland animals coming out. I'm very much in, my landscape is very rural. You'll see also in the show at PCC, farm animals figure highly as well as nature. I like to come up with in order to derive a feeling from myself and the audience, I try to spark something from a memory that you might not have had, sort of like a false reminiscence to derive an emotion. I think it comes from acting. I did study a bit of acting, and sense memory and visual, audio, nasal memories really do evoke a lot in an audience. I think my years of performance, I consider an audience quite often more than other visual artists, but ultimately, of course, I have to be happy in my own work, because the method I do when I'm creating work is if I come up with an idea and I don't write it down, but if it doesn't go away, then I have to pursue it, otherwise I feel I'm not being honest to my vision or truthful. And so much of this work, I don't come up with a reason why I'm doing something until later, especially filmmaking. To me, filmmaking is like a dream. You make the film, I do the storyboards, I shoot the film, and then afterwards it's up for analysis or like psychoanalysis if I were to take it to someone. But it's sort of like, I don't like to kill the creative effort by thinking too much exactly what anything means. However, I am very much attracted to metaphors. So here's The Old Witch. This was my last film, which was now 3 years ago when I shot it, The Day of Forevermore. And it started out with a tableau vivant, which is from history, a group of actors who stand still and create a still photograph. I wanted to do something Boschian inspired by. And you see me, I'm up there riding the devil and the different characters. It's a full-length feature movie. It's an hour and 20 minutes. If you haven't seen it, you'll see some excerpts here. I am going to release it eventually for the on Vimeo. And it's kind of elaborate set. This was at Human Resources. We shot the first scene there. And then the rest of the film was shot at Zorthian Ranch up here in Altadena. They were kind enough to let me have the student rate, which is getting harder to pull off, for the daily rate. So this is the old witch mother. I'm wearing a mask. Her young daughter, Luna, who's played by my real life daughter, Colette, is going to be indoctrinated into the coven of witches, and she really doesn't want to be, and she wants to be free. But the mother thinks she's rather tricky, but since she's 800 years old and an alcoholic, she's not that tricky. So the struggle is between Luna and her mother. It's a coming-of-age story. Again, this on the fly. It was a 4-day shoot. I made about 15 scarecrows. This is the field that Baba, the mother, tends, but makes potatoes, grows potatoes. Here's young Luna teaching the birds to fly, but they don't want to learn how to fly. They just want her to take care of them. Here's all the witches together. They're conspiring to get rid of the lead witch because she's not fulfilling her duties. Spirit girls make another cameo. They just really can't die. Random Hookah George, drug addict. And here's that ritual scene. They gathered around her and try to put her to sleep so they can infiltrate her brain and make her stay and take care of them. It's responsibility and running from responsibility tends to be a big theme in my work. Here it was debuted at Ace Hotel downtown. It turned out it became sort of a site specific when the monsters were invited to roam before the film on the balcony. Beautiful theater downtown. And they came up all on stage. And then I thought to myself, what would come after that? Well, if Luna did manage to get away, she might run through the forest and come upon a magical, enchanted landscape. And so I made a pagan chapel. So this is the pagan chapel. The waterfall changes different colors, and these stained glass trees jiggle, and they have a soundtrack of wind chimes. This was at Gavlak Gallery in Los Angeles. And the collages were themed as if you were in a church. And then you'll see some of the totems in the background. The monsters from the movies those vinyl masks fall apart rather quickly and easily. So this technique of embedding them with expanding foam and resin, the monsters from the movie now appear as totems. And then here's some of the collages are actually stained glass scanned and printed out and then reformed as collages. Here's all the witches. Here's all the, well, they're not going back. There's all the witches from the movie. And there's the devil who has burst through the wall and left his ass on the outside. He's watching it amongst the church pews. Now I'm moving into real contemporary things I'm working on. This is the new project. Since I had done the soundtrack for The Day of Forevermore, it was my music, all the different bands I was in as conceptual art bands, not the Party Boys. I decided it would be great to do a soundtrack album, but that wasn't enough. So I had to do each cover a different cover, and it's a way of me going through my artist morgue. Artist morgue is a collection of what collage artists throw in bins or organize neatly. And so what you're looking at is spray paint, decalcomania, which is the surrealist technique of gluing or putting paint on plexiglass, flipping over, and then you get some pretty interesting designs. And then whatever the design is inspired by, I look through my morgue and see what I've got to glue onto it. I'm allowing myself 10 minutes of actual collage work on top of the gluing and the painting. And it's a chipboard. I've worked with chipboards. So it'll be an edition of 200 LPs, red vinyl. I'm going to release this when I release the film for public. And here we are at the Boone Family Gallery. So I'll just talk a little bit about the show we're going to see, and then I'm going to show some film excerpts, and then we can go over there. I didn't want you to miss this window display. Some of the objects are from the PCC Swap Meet. The backdrop is old. My husband and I collect old theatrical backdrops, and we happen to have this one. And so I thought it was kind of fun to create an installation and also a window display. And here's a shot of the gallery inside. And you'll see some of the sculptures, the hanging sculptures are inspired by marionettes. Each sculpture, there's a little, again, a moment in time as if you're walking upon a drama. When you notice the girl on top of the dollhouse, on top of the hay bale, feel free to spin her around and you'll see inside of her dollhouse there's been a storm and her bedroom has blown apart. And so again, it's trying to create a moment of drama within each collage or each sculpture. And of course, my clowns. Alrighty, so now I might need some help here getting to the fictional video. I'm not sure. Okay, push that button. Oh, micro, yeah. So where is it? I don't see the video. Oh, you gotta pull out the computer. I'm not a bunny. 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 I'm not a bunny.
sparkle with no bitterness. Her skin is like milky glass. I know she keeps secrets. She dreams of being free of forevermore. Alas, goodbye, my Luna Crimson, the sweet shadow of my soul. Love will part our seas, the tides ebb and flow, from thee to me, forevermore into eternity!
Thank you. Maybe we should have the house lights a little bit in case there's any questions. And you can see the progression from Super 8 to the more high-def cameras towards the end and the elaboration. My next film I'm planning, I want to go in the complete opposite direction and try and do it just myself and in one camera, where it's more like a self-portrait, where I put the camera on a tripod, or God forbid, a selfie stick, and just shoot myself up in a cabin up in the woods as sort of a deranged nature crone. So I thought I'd get back on that horse after a few years. It's time. Does anybody have any questions? You could always. Oh, I have one back there. Yeah.
This is a very small question, but where in the world did you find a submerged former trailer park?
Oh, I should have mentioned. That's a good question. That first film, Destiny to Blow Up Friends, was shot at Salton Sea, and that was shot about 1993, when it had flooded in terms of 1993 recently, and the salt water rose and destroyed the towns, and it was polluted from our agricultural runoff. It still exists as it's America's greatest large salt bed, and it's quite a spectacular place, but the trailer park's gone now. I like to try to find a lot of different locations. I've actually have about 20 films, different places in California and beyond, Death Valley, the Pacific Ocean. So it's kind of a thing I do, is to discover places. Yeah.
A runoff question from that. Where's the ghost town?
Oh, the ghost town. That's called Sable Ranch, and unfortunately, those terrible fires we had, it burned to the ground. And the animals were saved, but they're going to rebuild it, and it's a real shame because there's a lot of movies shot there. Rob Zombie shot one of his films there. It was a famous place, and it was very sad. But they did, again, the student rate for us, which in those days was $200 a day. And they said, when we were shooting the scene in the barn with the cows, we shot the whole scene, and then she came running in and saying, "You didn't shoot the cows, did you?" And I'm like, "Oh, no." Because the cows are 500 extra. But the cows were never eaten. All the animals were rescue animals, and then they had to rescue them. So, yeah.
How do you think about the relationship between the moving image and still images and sculpture?
I think what I try to achieve in the stills and the sculptures are a moment in time, as if you've walked into a theatrical play and you don't know what the backstory is, you don't know what the forstory is, you don't know what the characters are doing, you just wandered in. And so I'm hoping that you will derive a bit of emotional content from each piece. And then the films are that, they move on. I don't like to make collages of my films or collages of my photographs from the films. I try to really keep them as separate individual mediums, but still have the foundation of narrative and foundation of drama. Yeah.
How many spirituals are there in total? Because in the film I saw 5, and some of the previous pictures I believe I saw like 4 and 6.
Yeah, well, there's 4 when the lead one has run away, and there's 6 when I guess they're joined by a saw player. I can't remember. There was some musician that they needed to have, so they hired one. And then, but there are 5. Yeah.
What is it about, I hate to say macabre because it sounds negative, but I'm not smart enough to think of another word. What is it about these kind of macabre, otherworldly figures like the human effigies that you mentioned, the clowns, the spirits, the masks, that is so appealing to you?
I think they serve as a nice counterpoint for the humor, because I like to work with humor in my work, but without the macabre, it would just be too funny. And so it balances it out, and then obviously if you do too much macabre work, then it's not, then it gets depressing. So, yeah, but it's also a moment, the macabre for me brings apart a moment, that uncanny moment, much like if you're falling asleep and you're like, oh, this is going weird. And so I think if you come upon that moment in artwork, you're very lucky to have that chord, that real deep inner chord, part of your psyche jarred. Yeah, Violet?
Can you talk about what it was like directing a feature-length film?
It was actually, I thought it would be like shooting 3 half-hour films, which I had done no problem, but it was actually like an earthquake where it was exponentially much more difficult. And it was at times fun, and at times it was horrible. It was just a real nightmare at times, because I had to get some of the Hollywood people from the night scenes, and you might not know this, but there's a bit of a schism between art people and Hollywood people, and they had a bit of an attitude on the set, and there was quite some fights, and it was really, really bad, and that was one particular day. And so it took me a long time to recover from that experience, like 4 years now. And so that's why I didn't really want to make movies for a while, because it was too difficult. And I always thought that I would transition to full-length feature movies, but I realized it's not worth it, and I'm not that type of person. So, yeah.
Do each of your monsters have some sort of a backstory, and does it happen before you create the monster, or does it develop as you are building?
Good question. Each monster, the backstory develops after the monster, based upon the way they look. Some of them are more hapless and not strong, and some of them are like more lost than others. That is a unifying thing, is the different characters quite often are lost, and they're in a journey, because without a journey, you know, what are they going to learn from? So that's why they do look, they're not your typical monsters where they're not scary people. They're just these beings that hang around and need direction. Yeah.
As you've mentioned, there's a sly humor going through your work, but it's also very mythic. It's like, which has priority, humor or myth?
I think it's my own personal mythology, and that I start with the foundation of the narrative, which was born from the mythology of creatures, and then the humor just kind of comes from it. It's if you go into art making thinking you're going to make something funny, believe me, it won't be funny. Well, oh yeah, one more question.
You seem to, you talked about finding a lot of the things that you make your sculptures out of and make your costumes out of. And it seems like a lot of the scale that you are able to achieve in the film comes from being able to like take from already created stuff. And I was wondering, is there, do you have like a personal rubric for what you allow yourself to take and what you think you have, and what you want to modify and what you want to create?
What to alter? Yeah, it is kind of it is getting to be more of an issue, especially with the masks, because now most of the masks are made for movies, and they actually have copyright, so it's a problem. But I like to think of the things that I find as chance encounters and working with, you know, the tradition of chance in art, but it's also sort of rescuing something that might not have had the life that I can provide for it. So that's where the sort of challenge lies. I think if I were to start from scratch, I would just end up spending so much time that I couldn't move on to the next project, and I get kind of bored easily. But it is also in terms of monster rescue, that's where it's sort of all right, I guess we don't know. So anyway, feel free to talk to me in the gallery. Thank you, Mahara.